Welcome to Chapter 4, which focuses on nonviolent crimes. So, most of our American legal system was developed based on common law. And common law was sort of imported here from England. Common law means it's a common custom of all of the realm or common to all parts. So common law develops out of judges are riding a circuit and they're going around different parts of England hearing disputes. And then they're settling those disputes. And then however they settle that becomes the law of the land. Now today, most of common law has been codified. So it's been turned into statutory law. And that's a law that's been enacted by the authorized powers of the state. So your legislature, your elected representatives. So let's start with theft crimes. Larceny at common law was the trespassery taking and carrying away of the personal property of another with the intent of depriving them of it permanently or for an unreasonable period of time. Now today, larceny depends on how you're deprived. So if you take something away with the intent of destroying it, selling it, or giving it away, you have shown an intent to steal. Now, possession is the legal right to control an object physically for a reasonably long period of time. So an item might belong to someone else, but you are in possession of it. Title means you have legal ownership. So you would have a title to your home. If you've paid off your car, you have a title to your car. And then custody refers to the momentary physical control subject to the right of another person to regain physical control at any time. Now, embezzlement is another type of theft, but it's where you're taking property with which you've been entrusted and you're engaging in what's called conversion. You're converting that property from someone else into your own personal use. So this can be accomplished by using a property for an extended period of time, selling it, damaging it, or somehow unreasonably withholding possession. Now, receiving stolen property only requires you to control the property. You don't have to actually physically receive it. And you have to know that the property is stolen. And this is the subjective standard. What did the person actually know? But that can be inferred from the circumstances. So, for instance, did you pay a price that was way below asking price? Was the transaction conducted with some type of secrecy? Now, robbery is a property crime and it's a property crime and a violent crime. So robbery is the taking of something from someone else, so it's a larceny, but it's done by actual force or threat of force. And that force must be greater than the amount necessary to just commit a larceny. So robbery is an intent crime. Now, when people say, oh, I came home and I found out my house was robbed, your house isn't robbed unless you are present. Your house is burglarized. Now, white-collar crime is this all-encompassing term, and it's usually referring to crimes committed by people of respectability and high social status. So when they're talking about white collars, they're talking about people who wear a suit and generally like a white button-down shirt with a collar to work. So it's a crime that's committed in a commercial situation, right, in some type of business for financial gain. And they're generally difficult to prosecute because the perpetrators are generally pretty smart and sophisticated. So this would include any type of fraud: computer fraud, telemarketing fraud, healthcare fraud, etc. Penalties for this range from a simple fine to imprisonment and everything in between. Now, many times a defendant might argue that they were entrapped. They were basically induced by the police to commit the crime. And in the U.S. v. Williams case, the defendant argued the government had induced him into accepting a bribe. It's actually pretty hard to prove entrapment, though. Now, the Commerce Clause of the Constitution gives the federal government the authority to regulate white-collar crime, but most states also have their own agencies that enforce this at the state level as well. Now, other crimes against property. As I mentioned, burglary. Now, under common law, burglary had a nighttime requirement. It was the breaking and entering of the dwelling of someone else in the night with intent to commit a felony therein. So today that nighttime requirement isn't there. It's usually an aggravating circumstance today. But it's the breaking and entering of the dwelling of someone else with an intent to commit a felony. So you don't actually have to commit a theft or even intend to commit a theft. If you break into someone's house and enter and then beat them up, that would also be a burglary and an assault and battery. So breaking occurs when you enter the dwelling. If you do that through an open door, perhaps someone did consent for you to come in, but that consent was gained through fraud, that would be a breaking. Maybe you enter the house originally without breaking, but then you open a door to another area, that could be breaking. And entering occurs if any part of your body crosses into the dwelling. So if the police show up and you've just got your hand through the window, that's entering. It also does include things like mobile homes. So it's basically anywhere someone could live. Now, as I mentioned before, nighttime today is only an aggravating circumstance because about half of burglaries are committed during the day. And if you think about it, considering that most people are at work or school during the day, it's actually a much better time to commit a burglary. Now, if you break on one night and enter on another night, that can also still be a burglary. Now, at common law, arson was the malicious burning of the dwelling of another. Now, scorching it is not enough. You actually have to burn it. And it now includes your own dwelling. And it's generally divided into 3 degrees based on the type of structure and whether or not people are present. Now, we also have a category of crimes called crimes against the administration of justice, okay? This is anything you do that's basically obstruction of justice. So anything that hinders, corrupts, or impedes the functioning of the judicial branch of the government. Bribery, suborning perjury, tampering with witnesses. Now, some of these crimes cross over and affect the judicial branch as well, and other parts of government. So things like counterfeiting, tax evasion, perjury, barratry, which is the exciting and stirring up of lawsuits between people, and then contempt, which we hear on TV a lot. That's the willful disregard of the authority of a court or legislative body. So a judge tells you to do something and you don't do it, you could be held in contempt. That can be a fine, or you can spend some time in jail for that. Crimes against public order. These are things that disturb the public peace and tranquility. Disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, affray, vagrancy. And these are often referred to as victimless crimes. And they're often moral in nature, but they're justified today as making sure that people's quality of life is better. Now, affray is the mutual combat of 2 or more people in a public place. Unlawful assembly is 3 or more people assembled in a public place, either for an unlawful purpose or under such circumstances as to endanger the public. A rout is 4 or more people, and they're taking steps towards the performance of that purpose. A rout is what happens before a riot, and a riot is putting that design into actual execution. And these are all crimes with which you can be charged. Now, vagrancy and loitering. Vagrancy laws today are often referred to as loitering. And loitering is being in a place or time in a manner where you don't have any lawful purpose, right, or any obvious purpose. So technically, if you're hanging outside the 7-Eleven with a bunch of your friends for a few hours with no clear purpose, you are loitering. Now, most of these laws are constitutionally too broad. They generally violate the 14th Amendment because people are not adequately warned as to exactly what constitutes loitering. Enforcement of these laws can also be a violation of the First Amendment if the people are basically, assembling for some type of protest, right? So part of the First Amendment is also your freedom to assemble. So this might be used against political demonstrators and unpopular groups. Prostitution is also a public order crime, and it's engaging in sexual activity for money or its equivalent. And with the exception of a few places in Nevada, it's illegal in the US. Now, obviously, there's a wide array of health consequences that come with this, but also consequences along the lines of, prostitutes or sex workers are often victimized by their employers and their customers. Employers is in quotes. So there's this belief that if you have a pimp, you are somehow safer. But pimps are generally pretty violent, and often prostitutes with a pimp are actually victimized more. Now, obscenity is not protected speech under the First Amendment. And obscenity is defined in Miller v. California, but it's still a pretty tough definition. So it's the idea that the average person applying contemporary community standards would find the work as a whole appeals to the prurient interests. So that would be shameful and morbid interest in nudity, sex, or excretion. The work also depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the law, and work taken as a whole that lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Now, there's a famous quote where one of the Supreme Court justices said, "I can't define it, but I know it when I see it." Now, when it comes to child pornography, First Amendment restrictions are relaxed. All child pornography is illegal. And child pornography is defined as the creation or reproduction of materials depicting minors engaged in actual or simulated sexual activity, or the publication or distribution of obscene material to minors. So you have to know the person is a minor, though. Some states will also penalize folks who do this with reckless disregard. They don't take any types of steps or actions to ensure that, pornography is not distributed to minors. One thing to note in terms of child pornography, it has to be an actual child. So if it's like anime or it's a drawing, that's not illegal. Now, public intoxication is also illegal, and the standard is that you are so drunk as to be a danger to yourself or someone else. Now, one other category of crimes is crimes against the state. Now, treason is the only crime that's actually defined in the Constitution, but there's some related crimes: espionage, insurrection, sabotage, sedition, subversion, syndicalism, and terrorism. And treason is defined in 1942 in U.S. v. Haupt. It's any act that strengthens or tends to strengthen the ability of enemies of the U.S., or that weakens or tends to weaken the power of the U.S. to resist such enemies. Now, after World War II, SCOTUS further defined it and said there needs to be an overt act, an actual act towards engaging in treason. So in order to convict somebody of treason, the standard is pretty high. You have to have 2 witnesses to the act. The behavior of the accused has to manifest an intent to betray the U.S., and that it provides aid and comfort to the enemy. Now, espionage is spying for a foreign government, and there are conditions that make it more likely that a troubled employee would commit espionage. And a lot of people that are spies aren't even very good at being spies. So things that make it more likely that an employee would then spy for a foreign government and provide information they have to have first an opportunity and some motive that's satisfied through the crime. Now, this might appear to be money on the surface, but more likely it's something like revenge, power, and excitement. They then also have to have that ability to overcome any natural inhibition we possess to not commit criminal behavior. And there needs to be a trigger that sets that betrayal in motion. Now, it's harder to control sensitive information today. Things like just even the copy machine made this harder. But certainly today with, all kinds of digital technology. So in a survey of about 98 Americans who were arrested for espionage, most of them volunteered. They were not enticed or coerced. Now, they're often emotionally disturbed folks. So they tend to have either antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. And that's because this appeals to some of those personality traits, like the rejection of society's standards, a lack of guilt, manipulative and self-serving attitudes, a deficient ability to perform close personal attachments, undeserved and grandiose feelings of self-importance, and tendencies to react to criticism or failure with disdain. Now, the other characteristic we saw here a lot was that they generally refuse to accept responsibility. It's not their fault. The security here is so lax. And that wraps up our nonviolent crimes.